shelter, so maybe some drier spells here, but certainly a dry end to the day for Northern Ireland and Northern England, albeit rather cloudy, but still some late glimmers of sunshine to be had further south across South Wales and southern England. Moving into the evening, if anything, that rain across Scotland continues to intensify. Could see some cold air beginning to engage with that rain as well, so could see some snow, especially across the higher ground. Warnings do come into effect throughout Monday and actually right throughout the New Year's Eve too. So if you do have any pre-Hogmanay travel plans across Scotland, do stay up to date with the latest warnings. But a quiet night elsewhere and fairly mild. So moving into Monday, a wet and tricky day really across Scotland. That rain moving into parts of Northern Ireland and Northern England too, but further south, largely dry. Quite a lot of cloud around though, but there will be some glimmers of sunshine, and for most of us, another mild day. But can you see that cold air beginning to spread a little bit further south across Scotland?
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could be joining the Great British Giveaway list of winners with your chance to grab a fantastic £50,000 in tax-free cash.
My name is Cliff.
And my name is Julie, and we won 25,000. I'd say don't hesitate, do it. If you're not in it, you've got no chance of winning it.
For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's at the Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, happy Christmas, and welcome to Portillo. I'm Tom Harwood, standing in for Michael Portillo this weekend. Now, coming up, South Korea plane crash. Yes, at least 167 people have been killed after a commercial airline is seen skidding and crashing into a wall at a South Korean airport. More on that later. 450 days on since the October 7th attacks. Yes, on that day, Hamas massacred just under 1,200 Israelis, including 36 children, and taking more than 251 more captive. We'll be speaking to the father of one captive. Well, following in Dad's footsteps, in lighter news, the daughter of the late great ventriloquist Keith Harris says it will be an emotional return to Blackpool's Grand Theatre as she kicks off her own Panto career this Christmas. Well, before all of that, let's get the very latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Tom, thank you. Good morning. It's just gone 11 o'clock. These are your headlines. At least 177 people are dead after a passenger jet carrying 181 passengers crashed in South Korea. 2 crew members have been rescued, but all other missing people are now presumed to have been killed, according to the firefighting authorities. Rescuers are attempting to pull people from the wreckage of the plane after it veered off a runway at Muan International Airport and crashed into a wall, bursting into flames. Local media is reporting the Boeing 737-800 jet was making a second attempt at a crash landing after its landing gear failed to open. The fire service says it believes a collision with birds and poor weather may be to blame. At least 3 people have died attempting to cross the channel in small boats, French authorities have now confirmed. A large-scale rescue operation off the coast of Calais began early this morning after reports around 50 people had struggled to board a boat. Officials confirmed 3 people had died and 45 others had been rescued, with 4 being taken to hospital with hypothermia. The death toll could rise, authorities are saying. It comes after news yesterday that 1,300 migrants have now crossed the English Channel since Christmas Day. The Prime Minister has promised to smash the gangs behind the crossings, but more than 22,000 people have arrived since he took office, up 25% on the last year. Now, the Prime Minister's approval ratings have been branded catastrophic with rural voters in a new poll following the planned tax raid on farmers. New polling by The Telegraph suggests just 1 in 5 believe Labour cares about people who live and work in the countryside. It's understood Sir Keir Starmer has been warned his ratings have suffered a catastrophic fall among countryside voters angered by his family farm tax. Meanwhile, the UK has pledged millions of pounds more to Ukraine to help investigate Russian war crimes. The Ministry of Defence announced it will give bodies, including the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office, £4.5 million to help bring Russian war criminals to justice. The government had previously pledged £6.2 million to help prosecute war crimes. The UN concluded in 2022 the war crimes had been committed during the conflict, citing evidence of executions, torture and sexual and gender-based violence. In other news, the UK has rejected Vladimir Putin's apology over the deadly Azerbaijan Airlines crash and called for an independent investigation. The Russian president apologised to his Azerbaijani counterpart for what he called a tragic incident, but he failed to take responsibility for the aircraft crashing after it had come under fire from Russian air defence missiles. The UK's Foreign Office has called for a full and independent investigation into the crash, adding that Mr. Putin's apology fails to recognise that the reckless and irresponsible actions of the Russian state pose an acute and direct threat to the interests and national security of other states. And thick fog is set to cause further flight delays today, disrupting Gatwick Airport's busiest day of the holiday period. Flights at Stansted Airport were affected by the weather conditions yesterday, while live departure boards showed delays at Heathrow, Luton and Manchester airports. The UK's main air traffic control provider said temporary air restrictions will continue today as airfields are affected by the fog. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Tom.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good morning. It's 5 minutes past 11 and we're on, I think, the 5th day of Christmas, as far as I'm keeping count. Welcome to Portillo with me, Tom Harwood. I'm standing in for Michael, of course, this weekend. Now, joining me on the sofas is the former government senior special advisor under the Conservatives, James Price, the former Armed Forces Minister, Bill Ratmell, and the former Labour advisor, Matthew Larser. We're going to go through some of the biggest stories this morning, and I think it would be remiss to miss out the story that is on the front page of the Daily Mail. Number one, because it involves this very television channel. Yes, the leader of His Majesty's most loyal opposition has reportedly hit out at my boss, at the boss of this television channel, for being too favourable to Nigel Farage. Well, is that the case? What is going on here? Let's turn first to Matthew Larser. What do you make of this story? I suppose it's always a bit embarrassing to be talking about yourself or the television channel that you're currently appearing on the news, but let's leave that be by the by.
Well, we'll have to watch what we say, won't we? So we don't get in trouble with management. We'll have to hope management have mince pies and not watching this exact second. I mean, look, I think this is an extraordinary story. I mean, first of all, the gall and the gumption, because whatever you think about, how TV is regulated, when Lee Anderson was a Tory MP, when Jacob Rees-Mogg was a Tory MP, before he's still in the Tory party, but he's not currently in Parliament, I don't think Kemi and the Tories were making a big fuss about GB News then. Indeed, they were encouraging the channel. So, I mean, I think firstly, she's got more front than Blackpool in trying to make this point now. It just makes her look ridiculous because she wasn't making the point then. The second one of which is what a niche fight to have. So this is the sort of the Sunday of the quiet Christmas season. She should be doing something that cuts through with millions of voters, and instead she's having a kind of ultimate inside the Beltway, inside the sort of SW1 bubble argument about the number of minutes on a particular channel. So it just shows. I mean, after her mishandling of the reaction to the Reform membership numbers, it just shows really that she hasn't got a clue what she's doing.
James, is that a point? Has Kemi Bade not picked the wrong fights at the wrong time?
I think it's hard, I'm afraid, to come to any conclusion other than that. I completely agree with her idea that the Tories shouldn't now be rushing out big policies and they need time to come and to work out what went wrong and what the country really needs. God knows that we're going to need a lot of fixing when this Labour government comes to an end. We can already see that 6 months in. But it does seem an odd target. I think the problem is perhaps, you call it the narcissism of small differences between the Conservative Party and the Reform Party now. You listen to what a lot of the members of both parties are saying. Are they very different? No, not really at all. Reform will look at the Conservatives and say, well, you're saying all this stuff now, why didn't you do it in government? And, we can talk about the reasons why. And in return, the Conservatives will look at Reform and say, yeah, everything you're saying is right, but you're not costing it. Really what should be happening, and I think Dan Hannan has said this in the Telegraph today, is that the two sides should be teaming up and working out how they can work together to kick Keir Starmer out in a few years' time.
Well, Bill Ratmell, is that what is going on here? Is Labour delighting in this sort of civil war on the right of UK politics?
Well, I don't know about civil war, but it is a truism of the politics that we're experiencing at the moment, that the right is split in the way that the centre-left was in the 1980s, and that massively benefited Tory governments in those days, and I think this is to the benefit of the Labour Party. We're not doing fantastically after 6 months in power, but you can see a scenario with the economy improving, investment in public services coming through, Labour gets back up to 34-35% of the vote and then wins another landslide on the back of a split opposition. Now, Badenoch's specific attack about GB News, you can make an argument that, I've not got a problem with active politicians presenting news programmes. You can make an argument that Reform is overrepresented, but it comes across as a bit desperate. And it reminds me of the 1980s when the Labour Party was light years from government and we used to blame the press and the media. And I think that's what's happening with Badenoch.
Does Kemi have a point here, though, in that clearly it's very attractive for people in the media to look at the story of the insurgent, and we see that Reform has risen from around 13 points to over 20 points in the polls, and that's an exciting story. But it's easy to forget that actually that is still a way behind the Conservatives in the polls, and every poll that we've seen has seen the Conservatives gaining more seats than Reform gains seats in any hypothetical future election.
I think that's true, and look, I think Farage and Reform are overhyped. I think there's a ceiling of about 25% to the potential Reform vote, because for every one voter that Nigel Farage attracts, he repels at least 2 others. That's not a position from which you can win a general election. However, you can stop the Tories from winning, and I think that's what's spooking Badenoch.
So I used to agree with that, but I think and there was this idea that young people are all going to be very, very left-wing forevermore. But actually, in the last election, I think Reform got the joint highest number of votes amongst men under the age of 30. There's a big shift that's happening there. Obviously, we're seeing a difference between men and women in their voting patterns. We saw that in a big way in America. But if Reform do tap into that youth vote, I think that could be a really powerful thing. And just on the GB News point, look, we've got 2 Labour roses sat beside a Tory thorn here. So there's great balance going on this morning.
A very rare occurrence.
Well, let's turn to Matthew Laza on this, because, of course, Keir Starmer wants to bring about votes at 16. We hear that could be a bill that's brought forward in the new year. Might that actually hurt the Labour Party if you get all of these perhaps more ideological young people scrolling through their TikTok feed, and what are they seeing? Lots of Reform UK, lots of Nigel Farage. Could votes at 16 actually be a big boon to the Reform Party?
I don't think it will do them any harm, because Nigel clearly has got a youth vote strategy, as they use the dread phrase, mostly by appearing on TikTok. I mean, votes at 16 is one of those things that parties of centre-left are always in favour of when they're in opposition, because young people like them, and then they're rather less in favour of when they're in government because young people turn against them. It certainly wouldn't have done Tony Blair any good in the era of the Iraq War, for example. So Labour's sort of vague commitment then was quietly dropped. It's quite a serious commitment now. It's been a commitment now through 3 leaders to actually deliver on it. So I think he's going to have to deliver on it. I don't think it will make the difference at the next election.
But it's strange. I was talking to someone on the Labour NEC before the election, where this was sort of formalised as party policy, and it seemed there was a real disagreement around lots of people around that table over what should happen, and it was Keir Starmer himself that was pushing for votes at 16. It seems that we have a Prime Minister who actually believes that this is something that he personally is invested in, and some other people around the shadow cabinet table are less enthusiastic.
Well, I think you can certainly see that the sort of grizzled old hands from the sort of trade unions and the party grassroots who sit on the NEC, the National Executive, the party's ruling body, will may be more cynical about it. I think Keir isn't cynical about this. I think he really wants to do it. I think Ed Miliband was passionate about it when I worked for him as leader, and I think they think it's something they should just deliver on. I mean, interesting thing about the whole issue about whether parties are going to cap at 25%, as Bill was saying, whether Labour could win another landslide with getting over 30% of the vote, is electoral reform. I mean, what a subject for between the Twixmas Sunday. But on the other hand, if we're going to get to a state where we've got 3 parties who are all getting, who are struggling to get 3 before their vote share, and one of them is winning a majority, I'm sure the pressure's going to.
I think that's a really interesting point. I made the argument that I think Labour can win again big on the back of 35% of the vote. But when I compare that to when I was a Labour MP and in government, it's nothing like that. There's not the almost hegemonic enthusiasm for the government that there was in those days. Now, maybe that's a feature of current-day politics, but that is a challenge for the Labour Party.
And, of course, overnight, we've had a new poll drop. This isn't one of those Commonweal Garden run-of-the-mill polls where, a couple of thousand people are polled and then we extrapolate from that. This is called an MRP poll. There are only a few of them done during the general election, but it projects individual seats across the country. These are massive pieces of work undertaken by academics. And I think we've got a picture that we can show of what this new MRP poll from the group More in Common, the charity, does show. Let's see if we can get this picture up for those watching on television. Here it is. On the left, we can see the result of the general election just earlier this year with that big sweep of red. And on the right, we can see what this new MRP poll, published overnight, shows. And it's a hung parliament. It's the Labour Party going down from over 400 seats to just over 200 seats. The Reform Party getting over 70 seats. The Lib Dems on 60-plus seats. The Tories on 200-plus seats. This is a staggeringly balanced parliament, a parliament that looks like it was conducted under proportional representation, but it's this peculiar system where you have 3.5 parties, all with double-digit polling numbers, James Price.
Yeah, I mean, ironically, given it, the group that put this out was called More in Common, it looks like the country has less and less in common as time goes on. But this is, one, why is anybody surprised? Labour have been absolutely abysmal in the 6 months they've had, and they're not even fixing the really difficult structural problems that might lead to them getting better results as time goes on. They're just, and we'll talk about this later, just going after little groups they don't like, whether it's farmers or whether it's private school fees and petty little squabbles like that. But it does also show that if you did have some kind of reform Conservative deal going on, the Tories said, look, we're not going to win in these seats in Wales, we're not going to get those red wall seats back, and let Reform perhaps have a free hand there, let the Tories go and take back a load of seats off the Lib Dems in more rural areas, you could see perhaps, a proper majority for a coalition between those two parties and get Starmer out.
I think that massively underestimates the degree to which Reform voters are genuinely alienated by the modern-day Conservative Party, and I think many, many of those votes are permanently lost to the Tories. In terms of this specific poll, More in Common is an outlier. Most of the polls in recent weeks have put Labour 5 or 6% ahead of the Conservatives. Not a great position from a very low base. We'll see what happens.
There was another poll out yesterday from JL Partners that did show, yes, Labour a few points ahead, but still losing their majority. I mean, whether or not Labour are a couple of points ahead or level pegging, it is extraordinary that we're talking about a party that won the biggest parliamentary majority comparable to Blair, bigger than Attlee,
but on a very low
losing it in one term.
But on only Matthew's right, on only 34% of the vote. I mean, mid-term blues have come early for this government, but I would eat my hat if that's the eventual outcome at the next general election. There's a long way to go. The economy will improve. The investment in public services will begin to deliver. And fundamentally, the Tory party has not faced up to why it was so unpopular and why it was so divisively rejected. And until it does that, or begins to do it, I still think they're light years from power.
Well, one of the reasons why perhaps the Tory party became so unpopular is people felt poorer. It was one of the first parliaments that we've had where people felt poorer at the end than the beginning. Now, of course, the Tories would point to COVID and the global scenarios, the energy price rises, the war, all of these different factors. But the fact is that middle-class families might be feeling the same way in 4 years' time. The Telegraph today, Matthew Laza, has a piece of analysis out saying that middle-class families will be hit by £8,000 in extra taxes this year.
I mean, good luck for trying, but this is actually from Andrew Griffith, who's one of the more active members of the Shadow Cabinet. So these middle-class families need to be sending their kids to private school first.
One child to a private school.
One child to a private school. I'll let you into a secret, Tom. 7% of kids in Britain go to a private school. That includes quite a substantial number of kids from overseas. Most middle-class British families do not send their kids to private schools. And if the Tories think that Middle Britain is the 7% who send their kids to private schools, then it hasn't got a clue. Andrew Griffith says, I think the quote in the article says, oh, the Labour's out of touch with Middle Britain. Well, no, I think he doesn't even know what Middle Britain is. I mean, because this analysis doesn't do it. The other thing, talking about the gall and the gumption of the Tories once this morning, I'm afraid they've got it again. One of the taxes they put in there is the continuing freeze next year of the tax threshold.
Yes.
2 points on that. One, it's the Tories' tax on aspiration, which Labour is removing, but not until the following year.
Labour extended it.
Yeah, Labour extended it for 1 year. Labour extended it and is then getting rid of it. The Tories had no plans to get rid of it in their manifesto. They didn't come up with any timetable for it. They cannot. I mean, they're just living in cloud cuckoo land.
Matthew, we can go through the others because, yes, it's true, the school fees affect...
Which is about £2.5 of this 8,000.
£2,626.
There you go.
Very good. But also, the national insurance rise for employers. Generously, I think what's happened here is they've applied 60% of that to employees. I've seen an analysis that shows much more of it might go on wages.
Don't you have to have a nanny to be paying this? Don't you have to bring staff on this?
Anyone with a job.
That was a joke, Tom. That was a joke. I thought they'd also included somebody with a nanny because they haven't got a clue what a middle-class Middle Britain is.
No. Let's be serious here for a second. Bill Ram, perhaps we'll bring you in. There is, of course, taxes have gone up under this government. Isn't it sort of wrong to pretend that they haven't?
The taxes have gone up for certain sections of the electorate. Taxes were going to go up whoever won the general election. The baked-in public spending commitments from the Tories would have implied cuts of 7 to 8% on top of austerity to non-protected areas. That is for the birds. And there's, frankly, Tom, a deceit in the public discourse that you can have ever better public services without somebody paying more taxes. And I think it's about time we ended that. People voted for many reasons for the Labour Party at the general election. They did want more investment in public services, and that has to be paid for.
And yet, James Price, contrary to that, isn't what we've felt ever higher taxes paying for ever worse public services?
Yeah, absolutely right. This idea that you just have to keep turning that ratchet. We've already got taxes the highest level they've ever seen. That same Telegraph story quotes the Institute for Fiscal Studies that people used to love to trot out to bash the Tories with, saying we're seeing taxes we've never seen before. And this used to happen after big world wars, and it's never gone back down again. This is the highest level of tax we've ever seen in the UK now. And as you say, it's leading to worse results. At some point, someone's got to realise that taxing people into oblivion isn't going to help. And yesterday, what did Keir Starmer say? I'm going to go to these regulators and ask the regulators how we get growth going. No regulator is going to say what they need to say, which is to get the regulators out of the way, get the government out of people's way, and let families, individuals, businesses choose what they want to do with their own money. That's the only way we're going to get growth and better living standards.
Final words, Matthew
Well,
Lawson.
on things like water, which of course Reform wants to nationalise, and this is interesting. Reform wants to go further to the left of Labour on that, and that's a sort of populist policy which would be worrying Labour MPs in terms of that map we saw with that belt across kind of South Yorkshire and into Nottinghamshire of Labour MPs because of that level of populism. And maybe actually the ship has sailed for the Tories on that kind of free enterprise, because people are looking to government to deliver. The challenge for Labour is, as you're saying, is that public services have got to get better. Otherwise, people are not going to vote Labour.
This is one of the interesting things about the amorphous Reform Party, that they can appeal to hardcore Conservatives, but also people of the traditional Labour side of things, and perhaps not many people have actually read through what the policy is that Reform is offering. And
including with most Reform MPs.
They're committed to £70 billion of public spending cuts. Once that begins to cut through, I think Reform will have
perhaps
some
this is
problems.
something we can dive into at the top of the next hour, gentlemen. We'll see you again then, but plenty more to come here on Portillo this morning. I must say, we did mention the GB News story a little bit earlier. A GB News spokesman says that the meeting took place without any acrimony and was very constructive. Meanwhile, a Conservative Party spokesman tells GB News that Reform has delivered a Labour government that has cruelly cut winter fuel payments for 10 million pensioners, put the future of family farming and food security at risk, and launched a devastating raid on jobs, which will leave working people paying the price. A vote for Reform this coming May is a vote for a Labour council. Only the Conservatives can stop that. Well, the Conservatives would say that, wouldn't they? Still to come, tragic scenes in South Korea overnight after a plane crashed, and that killed more than 170 people. We're going to speak to an aviation expert after this break. You're watching Portillo with me, Tom Harwood, here on GB News.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
And the latest series of Big Brother has just wrapped up, and as always, the housemates managed to cause a stir.
Yeah, that's an understatement. After 5 weeks of drama and twists and turns, 6 housemates were left to battle it out for a £90,000 prize.
Well, our next guest was there to the bitter end, coming third in this year's competition.
6 weeks you were in there.
Oh, I tell you what, it was a long time.
What goes through your mind? Is it, do you start to go a bit sort of, what do they call it, cabin fever?
Yeah.
Do you go a bit nutty?
Like, at times, not that I've ever been in prison, but I kind of likened it to being in jail, particularly when we were having to eat the porridge with water, no sugar, or, you know, that was difficult. And the feeling that you just can't leave. I mean, you can, but, you know, it was,
You can,
tough.
but you won't get your hands on that prize money.
No, exactly.
You made it to the end.
Yeah.
And it's quite a big house, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you feel as though you can get away from housemates if they're annoying you a bit, or does it feel like your hot house with
no,
people you don't like very much?
If you're sort of, you know, if you're not comfortable with a certain conversation or something like that, you can always take yourself and move away. But can you have time to yourself? No. Not really. I mean, even you might think, do you know what, I'll just go and lock myself in the toilet for a few minutes. There's a camera and there's a mic in there, so you can't escape that. And then you're obviously wearing a mic, so there is that little feeling of, you know, I could just do with having 5 minutes to myself, but you can't really get it.
You've met up with one side of the house, but not the other side yet. But is that still on the cards, do you think?
I hope so, yeah, because I liked every single person in that house, despite a few whispers on the internet, you know, like, do you not like this? I liked everybody in the house, never had a bad word with anybody, so...
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Portillo with, as you may have realised by now, not Michael Portillo this weekend. My name's Tom Harwood, standing in for Michael over the Christmas period. Now, at least 177 people are dead after a passenger jet carrying 181 passengers crashed in South Korea. Now, rescuers are attempting to pull people from the wreckage of the plane after it veered off a runway at Muan International Airport and crashed into a wall, bursting into flames. Well, local media is reporting that the Boeing 737-800 jet was making a second attempt at a landing after its landing gear failed to open. Joining us now is the travel and aviation expert, Sally Gethin. Sally, so many of us will be looking at that footage, will be thinking, my God, thinking all of our thoughts with those who have suffered and who have died in this crash. But also asking that terrifying question, is aviation as safe as we thought it was?
Well, obviously, they're very distressing scenes, but we must keep things in perspective, and aviation is a safety-first industry. And, you know, the chances of this happening are so remote. Having said that, every incident is really important and the investigation is absolutely critical in a case like this. At the moment, a lot of information is coming out very quickly, and it seems to me to be a chain of events where, unfortunately, it culminated in this eruption, if you like, of the aircraft at the end of the runway. But it seems to have started well before the aircraft touched down. In other words, it was approaching the airport and it seems to have suffered a catastrophic bird strike, which might sound nothing in the scheme of things, but actually, when you consider the powerful engines on board, any bird strike is very critical in a case like this. And that triggered a chain of events where the pilots could not keep in control. They could not deploy the landing gear in time. And then they ran out of runway effectively at that point. They skidded off the runway and they ran right into a wall. So it's just a series of events at this point in time. They have recovered one of the black boxes. Once they've recovered both black boxes, the investigation will begin properly.
Now, these black boxes are, of course, incredibly important. We're looking now at live pictures of the site of the crash where recovery efforts are still underway. But these black boxes, they tell us what has gone on inside the plane. They record not just the voice of the pilots, but much more besides.
Yeah, so it's basically the ADS-B transponder and all the onboard avionics. So all that is completely digital and logged in the data recorder. But you also have a second recorder which records all the voice communications as well, including the pilots and their communications with the air traffic control tower. It's understood that the control tower was the one that informed the pilots that there had been a bird strike, because obviously they could view it as the plane was coming in. So all those those communications will be critical for unravelling the series of events. I will say this, that I have learned that a couple of days ago, this same aircraft actually had to divert to Seoul en route on another flight due to an engine incident. So the history of that airplane, the maintenance record of the airline and maintaining that airplane will also play a very important part in this investigation.
But this is what's so scary about it. I mean, South Korea is a developed country. South Korea is a technologically advanced country. It's a stable country. I think everyone can understand that the Kazakhstan airline crash last week, only a few days ago, well, that was flying over Russia. That's a troubled part of the world, all the rest of it. I think we can all understand those caveats. It's much harder to understand caveats in a country like South Korea.
Yes, and you're right. And in fact, putting it into context, there's a big dynamic growth in air travel in that region, in South Korea and in Southeast Asia and Asia Pacific as a whole, in fact. And airlines are just sprouting up all over the place. Now, this Jeju Air is a low-cost carrier which has been established. It's quite a young airline, just under 20 years ago. And this airplane type, the Boeing 737-800, my understanding is that it originally was flown by Ryanair, and then it was acquired or leased by Jeju Air. And a lot depends on how airlines do conduct their safety checks and their maintenance records. I think the thing is that although it sounds like, well, it was a low-cost carrier, how can we trust that? Having said that, you know, the standards of aviation in South Korea adhere to world-class standards. I mean, some has been made today of the fact that, you know, was the runway up to standard? How could an airplane, you know, literally run out of space and run into a wall? But the authorities in South Korea are adhering to their point of view, which is that they keep to the highest standards, to international standards with the runway as well. But having said that, you know, that is a factor in the crash, that could that aircraft, if it had a further distance to run out of fuel, to run out of speed, could have potentially saved more lives. That's why I was saying that there are multiple factors at play here.
It does seem remarkably strange, and I don't pretend to know a lot about airport design, but that there would be a wall at the end of a runway. There can't be many airports around the world that operate like that.
Well, it does sound unusual, and there's a buffer zone in place as well. And in fact, the aviation authorities in Seoul are saying that there was a buffer zone in place. So you know that it wasn't as if there was suddenly a wall right at the shortest end of the runway, for example. But yeah, in my experience, I've travelled to many large airports around the world, meeting airport directors in my career, and it does seem very abrupt that you would have a wall like that and not some kind of more flexible structure as well. There needs to be some compromise struck. I mean, airports themselves often don't have a lot of space. Many airports are in congested areas, and so it's a constant battle for them to have enough space and aerodrome capacity to accommodate worst-case scenarios like this.
Yes.
I think that,
I know that many airports around the world or many cities around the world are moving airports further out of their cities. I know that in Poland they're building a new airport outside of Warsaw. Outside of Berlin they're building a new airport that's further away. I think they have actually built it now. That's further outside of Berlin. We've seen this in many American cities as well. There seems to be a trend of trying to move airports perhaps further away, less convenient locations, but perhaps more safe ones too.
Yes, and in fact, to go to your point there, here in Western Europe, most of the major airports completely constrained, including our own, Heathrow, for example, and don't have that extra manoeuvring ability that newer airports have. I mean, going to the Asia Pacific region, sometimes it's a land reclamation project. They will actually build out into the water to create runway space, to literally rebuild and create runway space. That happened at Hong Kong, for example. It used to have a very congested runway where there was a catastrophic incident at one point going back many decades, and then they built the newer airport out.
And of course, it's something that Boris Johnson suggested for many years as Mayor of London and then as Prime Minister, this idea of a Boris Island airport to replace Heathrow in the Thames estuary. I'm not sure if that ever got off the ground, so to speak. Sally, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us and talking through this developing story. Sally Gethin, travel and aviation expert. Thanks for your time. Well, still to come here on Portillo, we'll be speaking to the father of Israeli hostage Guy Dalal, 450 days after he was taken by Hamas from the Nova Music Festival on October the 7th. That's next. You're watching Portillo with me, Tom Harwood, on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Well, as we see out 2024, the weather is certainly set to change. We lose the mist and fog, but it's certainly turning much wetter and windier for most of us. Back to here and now, we still have some mist and murk around first thing this morning, especially across England and Wales. But I'm hopeful as the day goes on, this will start to break up more readily than it has done of late. So some afternoon sunshine for parts of England and Wales. Northern Ireland having a relatively dry day, but rather cloudy. But Scotland seeing plenty of wet weather, especially for Western Scotland, with some heavy and persistent rain here. We have more in the way of brightness around, certainly a milder day. Could see highs reaching 10 to 11 degrees. So we see Sunday afternoon out on a fairly quiet note across many southern parts. Some late sunshine giving away to some clear spells overnight. Northern Ireland and much of northern England relatively dry apart from the odd spot of rain, where the main bulk of the rain really is going to be across Scotland, where some cold air beginning to tap into, so we could see that rain turn increasingly to snow, especially across the higher ground. And really, if anything, as we go through the course of the night, that rain just intensifies across parts of Scotland. A very wet start to the early hours of Monday morning. Again, some snow across the higher ground. Warnings are in force right throughout Monday, and they will continue into New Year's Eve as well. So if you do have any travel plans across Scotland, do be aware and stay alert to the latest warnings. Further south, a relatively quiet start to Monday. Some sunshine around, especially across the far south, but again, a fair bit of cloud around. Maybe just the odd shower across the far south, but again, most of the rain will be across Scotland and Northern Ireland later on, with potentially some rain just also arriving into northern England. Mild for most of us, with the exception of the far north, where it will start to turn increasingly cold.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes. Thank you for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo, with me, Tom Harwood. Not Michael Portillo, because he's enjoying his Christmas festivities. Yes, it's 38 minutes past 11. Now, it's been 450 days since Hamas massacred just under 1,200 Israelis, including 36 children. Well, they also took 251 more captive. And just over a year on, still not all hostages have been returned to their loved ones. So I'm delighted to be joined now by Ilan Dalal, the father of Israeli hostage Guy Dalal, who was taken by Hamas from the Supernova Festival, aged just 22 years old. Ilan, thanks so much for being with us here on GB News this morning.
Thank you.
It must have been the toughest time for you, not knowing how your son is. What do you know?
Well, we are living in an ongoing nightmare for over a year and 2 months now. This situation is unbearable, and we are living it day by day. We are trying to hold on to any optimistic declaration that we hear from the ministers or the negotiators. But unfortunately, nothing is coming up to an actual deal that will release the hostages. So it's very hard for us.
It is unimaginable to think that your son, who was there at that festival, which should have been a safe place, which should have been a joyous place, was taken from his friends and from his family. I mean, it's just unimaginable, but clearly some hostages have been released over the last 450 days, focusing on women and on children. Do you feel there hasn't been enough emphasis on the young men that are still there, held by the terrorists in Hamas?
Well, my son went over a year ago with 3 of his friends to a music festival to celebrate life, to dance, to enjoy. Unfortunately, none of them came back home. 2 of his friends were brutally murdered on that day, and he and his best friends were taken and kidnapped to Gaza. From that day, we are hearing all kinds of things regarding the young men that are in capture, that Hamas treat them all as soldiers. We know that the conditions they are held on are unhuman. We saw these tunnels, these dark tunnels, with no air, with no human condition, and the last 6 hostages that were murdered in this tunnel. You saw the tunnel that is so small that they can hardly stand in there, and it's dark, and they can't breathe in there. And they are holding on for 14 months, and after 14 months, they are all in bad condition, and we must get them all back home as soon as possible.
Do you have any concerns about the way in which the IDF, the Israeli government, has been going around its operation in Gaza? The bombing campaign that, of course, has been very effective in taking out the Hamas leadership. But do you have concerns that some of those hostages could well be hit too by what some describe as, what some journalists are pointing to as a less discriminate campaign of artillery?
Well, of course, that every time there's a bombardment, then the hostages are in danger. They obviously can get hurt from this kind of action. Right now, I think we came to a situation where our achievements in Gaza are great, and we can, from a position of power, suggest an agreement that will release all the hostages and will end the war in Gaza, so people in the south can come back to their homes and start rebuild our lives.
So would you be suggesting to the Israeli government that now is the time to reach an agreement, a political agreement, that sort of the military campaign has been won?
Yes, I think this is exactly the time where we need an agreement with in the involvement of the international community that will bring finally the peace that we need, that the ceasefire that we need in order to get all the hostages back. There are more than 100,000 people in Israel that are displaced from their homes, more than a year and 2 months, and they also need to get back to their homes. The Palestinians need to get back to their homes, and we need to get this war over and start building our life and get the hostages back. And this is what we need to do right now.
Yeah. Just finally, Ilan, I know that you will have had conversations with people in and around the government. Do you have any inclination that this is something that the Netanyahu administration would be looking to do, perhaps in the new year?
Well, unfortunately, this is a thing that we need to press on our government to do. We have to convince them that this is the right way, because the line that our government is taking right now is more like bring down the Hamas and try to eliminate their rule in Gaza, which is, I think, right now is not should be the superior goal of the war. We need right now to get the hostages back, because their lives are hanging on a cliff, and they can die in any moment right now. And those who are already dead can just disappear. We need right now to make a brave operation and just declare that the government is prepared to bring back all the hostages in return to end the war.
Okay.
And this is, I think, the only way we can get all the hostages back.
Well, Ilan Dalal, it's been an honour to speak to you, father of Israeli hostage Guy Dalal. Thank you so much for being with us here on GB News this morning. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
And I know that everyone will be sending out their warmest hopes and wishes that Guy Dalal can be returned safely and soundly. Well, there's still more to come here on Portillo this afternoon. We're going to be getting to some culture. Yes, it's Panto season. But before then, here's the search for some winter sun. If you're looking for any of that, here are your top European holiday destinations.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello there, welcome to your latest winter sun forecast. Well, as we see out 2024, it's going to remain fairly unsettled for parts of Cyprus and Greece. This area of cloud and rain continues to linger here. But for much of Italy, Spain and Portugal, a fairly quiet couple of days with some late winter sunshine here. A few showers for Madeira, maybe just creeping into Canaries. But as we approach New Year's Day itself, it should be fairly fine and dry across the Canaries.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Our next guest has a rather unique career story. She was working at a pub aged 18 and Holly Farmer was spotted by a modelling scout, and it turned out to be her lucky day.
Scott Yoss Clark sent this message to Holly.
Holly, 18, 5'10", she does not belong in a pub. And I absolutely love that, Holly, because it's a bit like Dirty Dancing, where it's like, you can't put baby in the corner. Holly does not belong in a pub. You belong on the catwalk. What was that moment like for you when you were scouted by Yoz?
It was crazy. I have to say I wasn't expecting it, to be honest. Like, I was just on my lunch break. I was working at a pub, so Yeah, I was on my lunch break walking, going to Primark, and
you're going to Primark.
Got stopped by yours.
How did that interaction go?
Well, first question was, how tall are you? So, 5'10".
Very much that.
Yeah. Then he gave me his card and asked, explained everything. That he's a model scout, obviously.
Yeah, because generally when I scout, especially when I get close to that person, I tend to look in their eyes, and when you see something there, it's like everything works on the face, and then the eyes gives you away.
Well, you've spotted a gem in Holly. I mean, you can tell even when you walked in, you are built to be a model.
I did my first fashion week here in London and then went to Paris, and it was really fun.
Wow.
Now it's my full-time job. It's a bit crazy, to be honest, to be able to say that modelling is my full-time job now. Some brands will ask you to be a bit more serious, and then others not.
So it depends on the client's request as well. Ellie, give us your best model face. Ready? 3. I wonder if we can come back. 3, 2, 1. Very nice.
High fashion.
Yeah.
But you guys do all contorted moves, don't you?
Yeah.
Like all this high fashion. Do yours?
I'm just permanently living in model
You actually
model
are,
world.
though. He actually
This
does.
is it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo, with me, Tom Harwood. It's just gone 10 minutes to midday. Now, Kitty Harris, the daughter of ventriloquist Keith Harris, makes her Panto debut at Blackpool's Grand Theatre today. Her father, of course, set a record for selling the most seats during a 5-month summer season in 1983. Well, Kitty will be playing Cinderella until the 5th of January. And I'm delighted to say that Kitty joins me now. Kitty, thanks so much for being with us today. First of all, let's take a moment to remember your father, of course, who everyone will know from his variety performances. His, I think he top 10 selling recording artist. I think number 4 that his song got to back in the 80s. I suppose you're doing what you're doing today all because of your dad.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, I was straight out of the womb, straight into the shows, into the theatre, always watching Dad. You know, he just loved it. He loved pantomime especially. So for me, pantomime has been with me every Christmas since I've been born. So it's all I know, really. But yeah, absolutely. I love being here, especially in the Grand, where it meant so much to him.
No, absolutely, a really poignant venue. But this year, it's your Panto debut. What steps led you to taking to the stage for the first time at a Christmas Panto?
Oh, well, I have to be honest with you, it's not my first Panto. It's my first time at the Grand.
Right.
Doing pantomime. But no, I've been doing pantomime since I was 8 years old. I started off as a little Juve. So, you know, I was dancing first. And I've done Panto nearly every year. And I've worked my way up. I've worked very hard. And now, obviously, I get to play the lead, which has always been a dream of mine. So yeah, it's just fabulous. I love it.
Forgive me, your debut at the Grand, of course. That's clearly what is going on here. But this is, of course, a massive theatre. It's a massive show. It's a big moment. Tell us a bit more about the show that you'll be in.
Yes, so Cinderella, it's a classic, you know, and it's just, I think pantomime is just wonderful, especially Cinderella. You know, everybody kind of knows the story already, and there's so many different variations of the story, I feel, but our one is just, it's very special, and it's very magical. We have 2 little ponies in it, which are just gorgeous, and you know, it's funny, it's great. You know, Steve Brill is amazing, Hayley Tamadin is our fairy godmother, just everybody in the cast is fabulous, and I think that's important, you know.
Just in the last couple of seconds, I've got to ask you, any puppets?
Any puppets? No puppets, no. Funnily enough, I'll leave that to Dad.
No, fair enough. Absolutely. Forging your own path. Kitty Harris, thank you so much for joining us here on GB News this afternoon, or this morning even. Very much appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us. Well, much more to come. We're going to be looking at that new extraordinary poll. How might your seat in the next general election vote? You're watching Portillo on GB News.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. As we see at 2024, the weather is certainly turning increasingly unsettled. For some of us, it could potentially turn very windy, especially over the New Year period. Out there at the moment, we still have high pressure across the south, keeping things settled here, but already weather fronts are moving into Scotland, giving a wet afternoon here, especially for western parts of the country. Also quite windy here too. Further south, a much brighter day than we have seen of late. We have lost that mist and the murk. Some sunshine around, but still a fair bit of cloud too. But in the brightness, much milder than it has been. Could see highs reaching around 10 to 12 degrees. A closer look into this afternoon across western Scotland, and it's just really going to be a thoroughly wet affair here. Some of that rain heavy, especially across the high ground. To the east of it, maybe a little bit of shelter, so maybe some dry spells here, but certainly a dry end to the day for Northern Ireland and Northern England, albeit rather cloudy, but still some late glimmers of sunshine to be had further south across South Wales and southern England. Moving into the evening, if anything, that rain across Scotland continues to intensify. Could see some cold air beginning to engage with that rain as well, so could see some snow, especially across the higher ground. Warnings do come into effect throughout Monday and actually right throughout New Year's Eve too. So if you do have any pre-Hogmanay travel plans across Scotland, do stay up to date with the latest warnings. But a quiet night elsewhere and fairly mild. So moving into Monday, a wet and tricky day really across Scotland. That rain moving into parts of Northern Ireland and Northern England too, but further south, largely dry. Quite a lot of cloud around though, but there will be some glimmers of sunshine, and for most of us, another mild day. But can you see that cold air beginning to spread a little bit further south across Scotland?
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's still plenty of time to grab your chance to win our biggest cash prize ever, an incredible £50,000. What would you spend £50,000 on in the coming year? Spectacular holidays, a brand new car, home improvements, or maybe you'd just like to save it for a special occasion? For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here
We do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, you didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
A very good afternoon to you, happy Christmas, and welcome to Portillo. I'm Tom Harwood, standing in for Michael Portillo this weekend. Now we're going to take a look at political polling, because according to a major new poll, Labour would lose almost 200 seats in a future election, with the Conservatives and the Reform Party picking up the most. Well, we're also going to look at Prime Minister popularity, because the poll comes as Sir Keir Starmer's approval rating plummets in rural communities in particular. We're live to a farm in Scotland this hour. And it's New Year just around the corner. I'll be looking at the art of making cocktails all ahead of New Year's Eve. What's the secret? But before all of that, we're going to get the very latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Tom, thank you. Good afternoon. These are your headlines at 12 o'clock. Foreign Secretary David Lammy has offered his heartfelt condolences to the people of South Korea and Thailand after a plane crash killed at least 177 people. 2 crew members have been rescued, but all other missing people are now presumed to have been killed, according to firefighting authorities. The youngest victim was a 3-year-old boy, according to local media outlets, and 5 of those killed were children under the age of 10. It's understood the Boeing 737-800 jet was making a second attempt at a crash landing after its landing gear failed to open. The fire service says it believes a collision with birds and poor weather may be to blame. Now, breaking news, the Azerbaijan Airlines plane that crashed, killing 38 people, was damaged while over Russia due to shooting from the ground. That's according to the country's president. President Aliyev said he regretted that some circles in Russia had tried to hush up the truth about the crash by sowing false narratives about the cause of the crash. It comes after Russia's President Vladimir Putin apologised for what he called a tragic incident over Russia, in which the Azerbaijan Airlines plane crashed after Russian air defences were fired against Ukrainian drones. The UK has rejected Putin's apology and called for a full and independent investigation into the crash. At least 3 people have died attempting to cross the Channel in small boats today. That's according to French authorities. A large-scale rescue operation off the coast of Calais began early this morning after reports around 50 people had struggled to board a boat. Officials confirmed 3 people had died and 45 others had been rescued, with 4 being taken to hospital with hypothermia. The death toll could rise, according to authorities. It comes after news yesterday that 1,300 migrants have now crossed the English Channel since Christmas Day. The Prime Minister has promised to smash the gangs behind the crossings, but more than 22,000 people have arrived since he took office. That's up 25% on last year. The UK has pledged millions of pounds more to Ukraine to help investigate Russian war crimes. The Ministry of Defence announced it will give bodies, including the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office, £4.5 million to help bring Russian war criminals to justice. The government had previously pledged £6.2 million to help prosecute war crimes. The UN concluded in 2022 that war crimes had been committed during the conflict, citing evidence of executions, torture and sexual and gender-based violence. In other news, Elon Musk has endorsed the right-wing Alternative for Deutschland party in a guest opinion piece for the Welt am Sonntag newspaper, prompting its opinion editor to resign in protest. In the article, the tech billionaire explained why he had posted on the social media platform last week that only the AfD can save Germany. He wrote, "The portrayal of the AfD as right-wing extremists is clearly false, considering that Alice Weidel, the party's leader, has a same-sex partner from Sri Lanka. Does that sound like Hitler?" he said. Shortly after the piece was published, the editor of the opinion section, Eva Marie Kogel, wrote on X that she had submitted her resignation with a link to the commentary. And thick fog is set to cause further flight delays today, disrupting Gatwick Airport's busiest day of the holiday period. Flights at Stansted Airport were affected by the weather conditions yesterday, while live departure boards showed delays at Heathrow, Luton and Manchester airports. The UK's main air traffic control provider said temporary air restrictions will continue today as airfields are affected by fog. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Tom.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to Portillo with me, Tom Harwood. Well, we're going to be talking through some of the biggest stories in the news this afternoon. I was about to say this morning, but we are now after midday. That means you can open the sherry, I think, over the Christmas period. But joining me is the former government senior special advisor under the Conservatives, James Price, the former Armed Forces Minister, Bill Rammell, and the former Labour advisor, Matthew Larser. Right, gents, we're going to start with the front page of the Daily Mail today, because slightly embarrassingly, it does refer to this television channel that we're all appearing on today. Reportedly, the big boss of this television programme was told by the leader of His Majesty's most loyal opposition to stop being so favourable towards Nigel Farage. James Price, what do you make of that?
I'm sure this is all just a storm in a teacup and that it will all blow over and that, you know, I'm sure that it's all been misrepresented because I don't see why a leader of a major political party who has staked her whole credibility on going into the root of core philosophical issues and spending some time to get to the kind of policy issues would waste any time on this. Let's hope that's the case anyway, at least. But I think it speaks to a wider problem of the Conservatives and Reform. If they spend the next rest of this Parliament taking chunks out of each other, it's probably the only hope that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party have got of getting a second term. Because if there was either some kind of coalition, as it looks like might be happening with some of the polling that's coming along, it might even be required to see if the Conservatives gain loads of seats, Reform gain loads of seats at the expense of Labour. Actually, frankly, it doesn't look like the two parties have that much they disagree on anymore. And some will say in Reform, oh, look, you Tories didn't deal with immigration when you were in government, which is true. There are some reasons why. And the Conservatives will look at Reform and say, look, you're saying stuff about the economy that just doesn't add up. They can get over those things, then it's a very good chance to get a good, sound right-wing government in and kick Starmer's Labour Party out in a few years.
Bill Rammell, for a long time in British politics, you had the left going after the left. You had the Blairites and the Corbynistas attacking each other more than they ever focused on the Conservatives in government. Are we now seeing the mirror image of that?
Well, I think there's a bit of a truism there. I think the better analogy is go back to the 1980s, where the centre-left vote was split between the Labour Party and the then Liberal SDP alliance. And that kept the Tories in power for over a decade with huge, huge majorities. And I think there's a real chance that that happens. It certainly happened at this general election, just gone, and I think there's a real chance it will happen at the next general election. But I think the intriguing point about this story as well is who put this on the front page of the Mail on Sunday? If it was done by Badenoch and her supporters, then I think the questions over her strategic judgment are even more profound than they were before. And look, it's early weeks for her leadership, but I watched PMQs just before Christmas, and it's not been a great time for the Labour Party and the government, I acknowledge that. But I watched Badenoch and thought, God, you're really bad, aren't you? and you know, if this is true and she's planted this story, wow.
That is, of course, a big if, and of course we respect the independence of the Daily Mail and their sources, which I'm sure will remain private until the end of time. But Matthew Laza, is this all a bit introspective? Are we all sitting here in a bit of a Westminster bubble, talking about Prime Minister's questions, dare I say it, talking about what's written on Twitter? I mean, the average voter is not going to give a fig, are they?
Well, I mean, in many ways, absolutely, which is why it's extraordinary that this story has emerged and that Calamity Kemi has...
you heard it here first.
Absolutely. Are
you trying to coin a Donald Trump-style nickname?
Absolutely, why not? But, you know, because the truth of the matter is that the things that she's focusing on, and this is a week when, you know, the government, the wheels of government are pretty quiet. We haven't seen... There's no story today from the government, which is actually slightly worrying that the government hasn't put something out there. But anyway, that's you know, they haven't taken opportunity for a fairly quiet news weekend, to put it mildly. But instead of trumpeting some Tory initiative or even something decent to bash Labour with, where is the leader of the opposition? Well, all she's doing is whinging, and it looks like whinging about the number of minutes that she has or doesn't have on GB News, and that's extraordinary when she should be trying to cut through. I mean, she's made this great play about not coming out with detailed policies. Well, she's got to say something. She literally cannot be a blank space for months while she has a little think about what modern-day Toryism is.
Ed Davey felt very happy being a blank space during the general election, going down his water slides, falling off his kayaks. Perhaps having no policy at all is actually not a bad thing.
Well, because that's because Ed Davey was aiming for 80 seats. He wasn't aiming to be Prime Minister. What Ed Davey was trying to do is show that there is a bunch of what used to be Tory Britain that is now, partly through social change, the number of graduates. Look at the percentage of graduates in those seats that the Lib Dems won. They're some of the highest in the country. Social demographic change, the Lib Dems saw it and they took the opportunity and it's paid off for them. That's a bit different if you want to be Prime Minister. I don't think we're going to be seeing Ed Davey in Prime Minister in a wetsuit or not.
But I suppose, James Price, this is very harsh on Kemi Badenoch because, of course, she leads a party of 121 MPs. That's not that much larger than the Liberal Democrats in Parliament. I mean, is it a very difficult adjustment for a party that has been in government for the last 14 years to suddenly crash down to their smallest number of seats in history and simply not have the purchase that they used to have?
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think that it's not helped by some people saying things like, well, the Conservatives, we're the natural party of government, we'll get back in straight away and all that kind of stuff. That kind of arrogance, I think, has absolutely no place at all in any of this. And I think that's what Reform have been capitalising on. And a lot of their supporters are ex-Tories as well, people who have been disillusioned by it. Bill just talked about what happened in the 1980s. I don't think really anybody in that kind of Reform frontbench, maybe with the exception of Lee Anderson, would be entirely uncomfortable at all under somebody like Margaret Thatcher. And so that kind of old-school free market economics, but kind of standing strong on the world stage, those are things that probably most Reform politicians, supporters, members and Conservatives would all agree on. So can we get them to focus on these things?
It's not where Reform voters are. No. A lot of the Reform voters are people who pitch to the left economically, and they're not in tune with that Thatcherite agenda.
Really, really interesting. We're going to park that conversation for now because there are other stories in town. An interesting note picked up by The Sun on Sunday today that Keir Starmer is preparing to roll out the red carpet for Donald Trump. Not only is he preparing to fly out to America to greet Donald Trump soon after the inauguration in January, but also, Bill Rammell, a second full state visit after the, well, I suppose what Labour must see as the success of the Theresa May state visit that was offered in 2017-18.
Well, look, I'm not going to stand on my head and say that I'm delighted that Donald Trump was elected. I think there's real concerns about his agenda, particularly around tariffs, which I think can be hugely economically damaging. But he is the President of the United States, or he will be very shortly. It is our biggest international strategic partner. And frankly, and I speak as a former Foreign Office Minister, a state visit is a tool of diplomacy. And Trump laps up contact with the royals, so I've no doubt that this story has got legs, and I think we should use it to try and build the relationship.
Is it slightly embarrassing for our Foreign Secretary David Lammy, for a lot of the Labour MPs who at the first state visit, said, why on earth is Theresa May rolling out the red carpet? Why on earth are we offering a full state visit to Donald Trump? John Bercow, now a Labour Party member, then the Speaker, banned Donald Trump from addressing Parliament. He was banished from the Palace of Westminster. I mean, Keir Starmer's family went on a march against Donald Trump. It all seems nakedly political now.
Well, look, I mean, Trump is an extraordinary politician, unlike any that's been elected to that kind of office before. And there's a whole stack of people, including his potential vice president, J.D. Vance, who've said far worse about him than any Labour frontbencher is. However, once you're in government and once Trump is elected, you have to do business with him. And I've no doubt, and I know David Lammy's been working at that assiduously, Keir Starmer has, we're going to build the relationship.
And yet, Matthew Lazo, of course, you used to advise media for a leader of the Labour Party, who I think hasn't said the most pleasant things about Donald Trump. Is it not the case that were the Labour Party in opposition today, they would be screaming and howling about the idea of a state visit to Donald Trump, and it's only because they're in government that they're saying the opposite?
Well, I mean, it's possible, but actually I think probably not. I think that the second victory is what has kind of shocked people into realising that this is a reality, live with it. And, of course, a part of living with it is providing a second state visit. You wouldn't have got one if they'd been back-to-back terms. I think, you know, because there's the gap in the middle, that kind of gives you an elegant reason for having a second one. You have to, you know, I mean, nobody's going to pretend that anybody in the Labour Party, if they lived in America, would have voted for him. And we saw the somewhat unwise rounding up of Labour staffers to go and campaign rather unsuccessfully in Pennsylvania and other states. But you know, so therefore, I mean, you know, people know what the politics of the Labour Party are, but they also know that the Labour Party will put Britain's interests first while it's in government, and therefore, as Bill says, building a strong relationship with the Trump administration is vitally important.
Trump will surely
political broadcast on behalf of James Price.
Well, Trump will surely be thanking Starmer for sending those Labour staffers over. I'm sure that nothing could convince you more to vote for Trump than some British Labour Party staffer saying,
absolutely,
you know, you've got to go and vote for Kamala Harris because she's a woman and she's this, that and the other, right? Which is basically all that anyone was doing.
Supported by the Guardian newspaper in the 2004 election to back John Kerry in certain key counties in states like Ohio. I think I'm right in saying that the key counties that the Guardian newspaper targeted with British voters phoning up and saying, you've got to back this guy Kerry, they actually swung more to Bush than the other counties.
Yeah, but come on, Tom, the reality is that there are historic links between the Labour Party and the Democrats and the Tory Party and the Republicans, and for decades party staffers, party members have gone across and supported their sister party. There's nothing new about that.
Well, there are stronger links, of course, between the United States as a country and the UK as a country. We make a big song and dance about the special relationship here. In a couple of months, I'm getting married to an American, full disclosure.
Congratulations.
And yet you go over there, and not enough of them, frankly, know about the special relationship and understand. You know, Churchill was half American, Harold Macmillan half American, Boris obviously was born over there as well. And you've finally got a president who is totally, unequivocally, unbelievably pro-British. There's that amazing bit of video of Trump sat on a plane somewhere, going through a book and showing pictures of him meeting the Queen and how wonderful it was and how much he loves Britain. He is half British. His mother was born in Scotland, and he's so pro-America, and that's a world away from when Obama removed the bust of Winston Churchill from the Oval Office.
Which
we get back
Trump put back in the
exactly right. We get back to a proper economic, military, diplomatic, cultural alliance with the United States, rather than the EU, which seems to be only focused on telling companies what kind of charger cable they can have for their mobile phones.
Are you prepared to go to war for Canada as a Commonwealth country? Because at the moment it looks like we may well have to. Canada's in meltdown at the moment.
The eventual reunification of the Anglosphere would be a great thing for the world.
OK, we're going to zoom back to Bill Rammell now, because, Bill, this is an interesting point, Donald Trump's Anglophilia. The fact that Britain now sits outside the European Union customs union, to dive into those technicalities, whereas if we were a member of the EU, we could be facing European tariffs from America. Because we're outside the EU, it could be the case that Europe gets tariffs from America, pays all of these heavy taxes, gets all of this mired trade war nonsense, and Britain escapes it.
Well, there's a risk for the UK as well. Whatever happens to Europe, you know, Trump is on record as saying he wants tariffs across the board, targeting us as well. And that'll be damaging for us and damaging for the United States and damaging for the global economy.
You accept the point that having left the European Union, Britain perhaps has an easier way of avoiding those American tariffs than the whole of Europe does, which Trump seems to have more antipathy towards?
It is going to depend on what Trump does. If he follows through on some of his platform, for example, distancing himself from NATO, slapping on tariffs across the board, you know, we're going to be confronted with some very hard choices. I think we've got to work on our own with the special relationship, but also with our European partners, and they still are our partners, to try and bring counsels of more reasonable thinking to the Trump administration.
Well, talking about some of those domestic challenges, of course, we had a budget just a couple of months ago that raised all sorts of taxes, and one of those taxes that will be coming in just a few days' time now is the VAT levy on private schools. Matthew Laza, you're smiling here, but for a lot of families, this is the difference between
for a very small minority of families,
their child out of school or not.
Yes. I mean, you know, are we going to see some kids leave private schools? Yes. Are we going to see the majority of kids leave private schools? No. Let's remind ourselves, the average private school fees now are £18,000 a year. Most middle-class families in Britain cannot afford £18,000 a year per child to send their kids to school. Well, I'm partly smiling because, you know, a lot of people, especially people who live in London, who themselves went to private school or who send their kids to private school, get very exercised about this. It is one of Labour's most popular policies. Yeah. It polls incredibly well. The vast majority of people in the country think it's fair, and investing money in where Middle Britain's kids really go to, which is the local comprehensive, is a very popular policy. So it's one of those that you know, the elite get upset about, but Middle Britain actually doesn't.
James Price, what do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, it is a sideshow to some extent because the numbers are quite small, but I don't join the mirth in the fact that hundreds of thousands of children are going to have their education be disrupted. And by the way, an awful lot of kids with special educational needs and disabilities, they're the people who are really going to be hurt by this. Labour have ignored all the warnings about this, and lots of people will suffer. What happens when those kids end up being moved into the state schools is going to mean less resources for everybody else as well. And by the way, this is the same Education Secretary who's decided to start undoing all of the things that the Conservatives did in government that made education in England the best it has been for a very long time and the best we've seen in international standards all over the place. And she's also, by the way, the person who's banned the Free Speech Act, which is one of the bulwarks against kind of censorship and cancel culture that's been such a problem. Education in this country is our way to better wealth and happiness and joy and social mobility and all those things. And as a state school boy who suffered under the Blair era in a pretty rummy state school...
Standards went up.
Standards it was dreadful as a result compared to all my mates who got to go to these private schools.
Let's just mention Bill Rammell for a second, because you were shaking your head at that idea that the Education Secretary has scrapped the Free Speech Act. That is something she's done.
She's paused it. And look, you know, I'm an absolute advocate of free speech and open debate. There is a technical argument that you didn't need the legislation because Margaret Thatcher's 1986 Education Act imposed a duty of free speech on universities. But I think it was symbolic. I think the decision to pause it was a bit of a strategic misjudgment. It's on hold. I would not be surprised if the broad thrust of the provisions are eventually enacted.
That's very interesting, because it does seem, Matthew Laza, and I know you talk to people in and around the top of the Labour Party all the time, the movers and the shakers. Some people say that the Education Secretary is on leadership manoeuvres.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I think if we'd seen when Angela Rayner had her local difficulties about her house, they would look like she may have to exit in a hurry. Thankfully, Angela was completely exonerated. I think Bridget probably would have been the leadership candidate to be deputy leader. She's a woman. She's from the north of England. She's from the north east, and that would provide balance to Starmer ticket.
But to some extent, the reason why she's sort of very publicly undoing the Gove reforms, slapping tax on private schools,
just to keep the Labour Party selectorate happy? Cynical that.
She's leaning into media-friendly, hot-button, dare I say it, culture war issues.
Well, I mean, she's certainly a very talented person, and she was, I mean, frankly, when we were looking around collectively as the sensible wing of the Labour Party for potential candidates, Bridget's name came up even when she was much lower profile. So I don't think she's doing this because she's cynically trying to get in touch with the Labour Party membership. I think she is in touch with the Labour Party membership and with Labour voters.
And you've heard it there, that the children of this country are going to suffer for the ambition of one woman who wants wants to mess up
That's the reverse of what I said.
huge, unbelievable educational increases just to help herself out. And the one example of this was scrapping the Latin course at A-levels halfway through a year. I never got to learn Latin, lots of people don't, but for those kids who did, they're having that education pulled out from under them. So now it's only the posh kids at private schools who are going to get that, all thanks to Bridget Phillipson. Well done, her.
Now who on earth will know where Caecilius is?
He's in the Horto.
Est in Horto. Absolutely.
Not me, with no Latin in my comprehensive.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen, but thank you so much for talking through those big issues this afternoon. I must say that a GB News spokesman has commented on that piece on the front of the Daily Mail, saying, I should say the Mail on Sunday, saying that the meeting that took place without any acrimony and was very constructive. That meeting between the boss of GB News and Kemi Badenoch. A Conservative Party spokesman tells us at GB News that Reform has delivered a Labour government that has cruelly cut winter fuel, winter payments for 10 million pensioners, put the future of family farming and food security at risk, and launched a devastating raid on jobs which will leave working people paying the price. The Conservative spokesman continues, a vote for Reform this coming May is a vote for a Labour council. A Labour council. Only the Conservatives can stop this. Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? Now, still to come, why Labour would lose nearly half of its seats if an election was held today. We're going to be speaking to an expert psephologist. You're watching Portillo with me, Tom Harwood, on GB News.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/your-say.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The BBC has been branded jaw-achingly stupid, not by me, by the way, over its decision to cast black and ethnic minority actors in the historical drama of Wolf Hall. Now, is this a forward-thinking idea or nonsense? Are we rewriting history? Henry, I mean, the Tudors were real-life people. They were pretty much white.
Well, some of these shows depart so much from historical context anyway that maybe it doesn't make any difference. But I think just generally we've got a problem in this country with portraying history in its correct sense. You can't change history. And I think it's about the motivation. If the motivation is to sort of to make a political point, then I think it's wrong.
What I find kind of tedious about people finding this instant jaw-droppingly stupid, Jesus was portrayed by somebody who's half Slovak and half Irish. Moses was portrayed in the Exodus by an Englishman. So, you know, same with Anne Boleyn, you know, was portrayed by Natalie Portman, who is Jewish. So if this is the one thing that's getting people angry, then there's something deeper within that rage, because I think Hollywood's been doing that, where people...
When you say something deeper, do you think there is a hidden racism and people are complaining about this?
Well, I think for some, maybe, yes. I can't speak for everybody because this news dropped today. I don't know why they are thinking that it's egregious. But there absolutely must be some underlying racism if this is the only one that you're upset about.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon and welcome back to Portillo here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood. It's 28 minutes past midday. Now, the Labour Party would lose nearly half its seats if an election was held today. This, according to a major new poll by More in Common, Labour would be reduced to just 228 seats from the 411 it won in July. Sir Keir Starmer's party could lose 87 seats to the Conservatives, 67 to Reform UK and 26 to the SNP, all counteracting that enormous landslide it enjoyed in July. Well, let's talk to one of those people behind this extraordinary, enormous poll. Ed Hodgson is from More in Common and joins me now. Ed, first of all, tell us what's the difference between your run-of-the-mill common or garden poll and one of these super special multi-level regression and post-stratification MRPs.
Yes, thanks for having me. So the difference really is partly to do with the modelling that's involved and partly to do with the way and the number of people you contact for the poll. So a normal poll that More in Common and other pollsters conduct all the time, you take around 2,000 people normally and you try to get them to represent the country. And of those 2,000 people, you can see how they're likely to vote. The issue with that is because of our voting system, our first past the post system, you don't necessarily know where those people are and how that will translate into the number of seats that each party will have. So for this sort of poll, we're polling many more people. It's 11,000 people. And we're looking not just at how they're going to vote, but we're looking at where they live. We're also looking at their demographic information, like how old they are, whether they own or rent their home, their ethnicity, all sorts of factors like that. And we use that to build a model of how every type of voter is likely to vote. And then based on what we know about who lives in which constituency, we can make an estimation about how that constituency as a whole would vote.
And Ed, this is what we're looking at on our screens now for those watching on television, the sort of strange patchwork that the country will become, going from a Labour-dominated country to a party where you can clearly see, well, 4 parties having a significant number of seats.
Yeah, it's really striking. I mean, the level of fragmentation was high at this general election, and it looks set to get even higher. In fact, we find 270 seats where the winning party is winning on less than a third of the vote. And there's 14 seats where no parties get more than a quarter of the vote. So we're going to end up with a lot of seats where the winning party has really not been chosen by that many voters within it.
And this makes your job as a pollster very, very difficult. If you have these super slim margins, parties on less than 30%, almost being having a toss-up as to whether or not they win that seat or not. This is going to make some pollsters, I mean, they could be just 1 or 2 points out, and that could be the difference for hundreds of seats.
Yeah, I mean, there are a huge number of very close 3- or even 4-way races in the country. If you look at a seat like Dover and Deal, for example, our model has Labour, the Conservatives and Reform UK all basically on 27 points, all within about 1 percentage point of each other. And there's a number of other seats like that. If you look somewhere like Swansea in Wales, where you have the extra factor of Plaid Cymru, or if you look in Scotland where you have the SNP, you get 4-way races, which are really tight and really difficult to model.
But the fascinating situation about your MRP poll today is that Reform go from 5 seats to 70 plus. How does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, one key thing with that is that behind the scenes at this general election, Reform came second place in a large number of seats. And they can build on those seats where they came in second place and really focus their resources rather than trying to spread out their resources across the country. It's easy to see how they could do well in those seats where they're second place. And as you pointed out earlier, many more of those seats are actually Labour seats, not Conservative seats. So we think that they're going to take about 67 seats from the Labour Party if an election were held today.
That is extraordinary, but of course it's the Conservatives that you think are going to pick up more seats than Reform. What does that make in terms of the composition of Parliament? Can anyone cobble together some sort of coalition to govern?
It's a real challenge. So the Conservative Party would still be in second place with about 220 seats. But even if they were to form a coalition with Reform UK, it wouldn't be enough to form a working majority. The Labour Party, if they wanted to form a workable majority, they'd need a sort of 5-party coalition with the Green Party, with the Lib Dems, with SNP, with Plaid Cymru. And even then, they'd only get a majority of about 10 seats. So it's really challenging to see how this would work. And it basically looks like the current voting patterns of the country essentially breaks our electoral system.
Ed, I've been looking through my political history, and this sort of smacks a little bit, not entirely, but a little bit, of that 1945 Parliament. Clement Attlee gets in with an unexpected and enormous Labour majority. There's another election in 1950 where that Labour majority is almost wiped out, and that Parliament stumbles on for less than a year, and then Winston Churchill's back as Prime Minister. Could we see something very similar in this Parliament? There's an inconclusive election in 4 years' time where no one wins a majority, and then perhaps because of this unstable 5-party coalition that would be needed to govern, we actually have a second election very, very quickly following the next one.
I wouldn't want to risk getting in the business of predicting what will happen in 5 years' time, because we know anything could happen before then. But this poll does show, and it's a trend that's been happening for many, many years, it's extremely fragmented voter base, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if the next election was extremely sort of fragmented in unprecedented ways. What I would say is that this Labour government won a historic majority basically because voters around the country wanted change, even if they didn't necessarily agree what they wanted change on. And we poll on this every few weeks. We ask voters, do you think the new government feels like change, or do they feel like more of the same? And 2/3 of people stubbornly throughout this Parliament have said the government feels like more of the same. So if the government can't deliver on the change they promised, I think it's likely that the fragmentation will stick around.
A huge challenge to the Prime Minister. Well, Ed Hodgson, thank you so much for joining us. You're, of course, from More in Common, which conducted that enormous poll. Thanks for joining us. Well, next we're going to be live in Scotland as the Prime Minister's popularity plummets in rural communities. We'll be live in one such community. But before that, let's get an update on your news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Tom, thank you. Your headlines at 12:34. Foreign Secretary David Lammy has offered his heartfelt condolences to the people of South Korea and Thailand after a plane crash killed 179 people. 2 crew members have been rescued, but all other people have been killed. The youngest victim was a 3-year-old boy, according to local media outlets, and 5 of those killed were children under the age of 10. It's understood the Boeing 737-800 jet was making a second attempt at a crash landing after its landing gear failed to open. The fire service says it believes a collision with birds and poor weather may be to blame. The Azerbaijan Airlines plane that crashed, killing 38 people, was damaged while over Russia due to shooting from the ground, according to the country's president. President Aliyev said he regretted that some circles in Russia had tried to hush up the truth about the crash by showing false narratives about the causes of the crash. It comes after Russia's President Vladimir Putin apologised for what he called a tragic incident over Russia, in which the Azerbaijan Airlines plane crashed after Russian air defences were fired against Ukrainian drones. The UK has rejected Putin's apology and called for a full and independent investigation into the crash. Now, at least 3 people have died attempting to cross the Channel in small boats this morning. That's according to French authorities. A large-scale rescue operation off the coast of Calais began early this morning after reports around 50 people had struggled to board a boat. Officials confirmed 3 people had died and 45 others had been rescued, with 4 being taken to hospital with hypothermia. The death toll could rise. It comes after news yesterday that 1,300 migrants have now crossed the English Channel since Christmas Day. The Prime Minister has promised to smash the gangs behind the crossings, but more than 22,000 people have arrived since he took office, which is up 25% on last year. And thick fog is set to cause further flight delays today, disrupting Gatwick Airport's busiest day of the holiday period. Flights at Stansted Airport were affected by the weather conditions yesterday, while live departure boards showed delays at Heathrow, Luton and Manchester airports. The UK's main air traffic control provider said temporary air restrictions will continue today as airfields are affected by the fog. Those are the latest GB News headlines, more in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. As we see at 2024, the weather is certainly turning increasingly unsettled. For some of us, it could potentially turn very windy, especially over the New Year period. Out there at the moment, we still have high pressure across the south, keeping things settled here, but already weather fronts are moving into Scotland, giving a wet afternoon here, especially for western parts of the country. Also quite windy here too. Further south, a much brighter day than we have seen of late. We have lost that mist and the murk. Some sunshine around, but still a fair bit of cloud too. But in the brightness, much milder than it has been. Could see highs reaching around 10 to 12 degrees. A closer look into this afternoon across western Scotland, and it's just really going to be a thoroughly wet affair here. Some of that rain heavy, especially across the high ground. To the east of it, maybe a little bit of shelter, so maybe some drier spells here, but certainly a dry end to the day for Northern Ireland and Northern England, albeit rather cloudy, but still some late glimmers of sunshine to be had further south across South Wales and southern England. Moving into the evening, if anything, that rain across Scotland continues to intensify. Could see some cold air beginning to engage with that rain as well, so could see some snow, especially across the higher ground. Warnings do come into effect throughout Monday and actually right throughout the New Year's Eve too. So if you do have any pre-Hogmanay travel plans across Scotland, do stay up to date with the latest warnings. But a quiet night elsewhere and fairly mild. So moving into Monday, a wet and tricky day really across Scotland. That rain moving into parts of Northern Ireland and Northern England too, but further south, largely dry. Quite a lot of cloud around though, but there will be some glimmers of sunshine, and for most of us, another mild day. But can you see that cold air beginning to spread a little bit further south across Scotland?
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, happy Christmas, and welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo, with today not Michael Portillo, but me, Tom Harwood. It's just gone 20 to 1. Now, the Prime Minister's approval ratings have been branded catastrophic with rural voters. This in a new poll following the planned tax raid on family farms. Well, despite being hit by Labour's new inheritance tax for family farmers, many of those farms continue to fight on against the challenges facing the industry. So we're going to cross now to the Scottish town of Munchline to speak to Scotland reporter Tony Maguire. Tony, tell us where you are.
Hello, well, I'm not in Munchline, but I appreciate the effort. 5 stars for that. We're in Mauchline today.
Oh, there we go.
Ayrshire. And certainly we're at we're at Moss Gill Farm, and indeed we're having an absolutely rare day here. Certainly, you know, the budget of last year, that dreaded budget from Rachel Reeves, that's not too far from our minds. But before we get to that, you know, it's important that it's not all about the politics, that we take some time to get to know our farmers and to understand their day-to-day. And I'm joined today by Bryce Cunningham. Bryce, thank you so much for inviting us. It's been the best day. you know, we know now that I'm a huge animal fan, as if anyone was any doubt. Tell us a little bit about Mosgiel and what actually makes the farming here of your cattle so special.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. So welcome to Mosgiel Organic Farm. We're an organic farm in Ayrshire, and what we do is we farm organically here in my own farm, but we also work with 5 other farms who are members of a cooperative to take milk, brew it on here, on site here at Mosgiel, and deliver it right across Scotland.
And brewing it, come on, you got to explain that one.
So 7 years ago, we were effectively bankrupted by Big Dairy when the milk prices collapsed, and what I wanted to do was take raw milk to the streets of Scotland. However, raw milk's illegal in Scotland, so we created this new way of pasteurisation called brewing. So it's something we created ourselves. So what we can do is we can heat the milk up very slowly. It's effectively pasteurisation but done differently, and it allows the texture, the flavour and the nutrition of raw milk to stay while meeting the laws of Scotland. And we can do that not just with our milk on the farm, but with the 5 other farms we work with.
Now, that sounds like the kind of milk that a former tenant of this land here in Ayrshire might have enjoyed. You might have heard of him, Rabbie Burns. Now, Rabbie Burns, I believe, is from this very area, and you know, that was definitely part of the idea and the growth of the farm here, wasn't it?
It was indeed. So Rabbie Burns ploughed just 50 metres that way from where we're standing just now at Mosgiel Farm. We farm that land today and we're very privileged to do so. And yeah, you're absolutely right. So we've also got Ayrshire cows on this farm, just like Rabbie Burns did a couple of 100 years ago. And in fact, Rabbie Burns' mother Agnes was a famous cheesemaker of the time, and she used Ayrshire cows as well. So back in the early days of Mosgiel milk, what I wanted to do was take the milk Rabbie would have drank and share it right across Scotland, and that's where the brewing process came from.
Fantastic, and we can see some of those gorgeous Ayrshire cows behind us. Certainly, you know, they've been very hospitable guests along with yourself today, and it's been great. But you know, we heard just there that obviously, you know, to bring it back to the politics, Keir Starmer, well, he's got very low approval ratings here in the country. In fact, just 1 in 5 people thinks he cares about people in rural communities and farmers. You know, do you think that 2025, is there still hope as we are about to enter into this new year off the back of that rather devastating budget?
Well, there's always hope, I suppose. You know, farming is the most resilient industry. It's the oldest industry that's ever survived, and we'll certainly survive this. It's just how we're going to survive it. It's a question mark. Here at Mosgiel, what we want to do is show there's a different way to go forward. So we want to deliver value not just to farmers, but also to our communities as well. So if you take our brewing aspect, for example, we can brew milk on here on the farm. We can deliver that to consumers. That gives value to consumers. They're willing to support us through higher prices, and we can then deliver those prices back to farm and create that link in the supply chain that does something different. Now, going back to the politics as well, you know, in this area, it's not just Robert Burns we're famous for. Keir Hardie, who founded the Labour Party, lived just 15 miles from this farm as well. So, you know, it'd be really good if politicians started coming onto farms, opening up, having actual conversations with real farmers right here in farms as well. In this constituency where Keir Hardie came from, it'd be a really special way to have an opportunity to have an open conversation.
I think that's maybe some of the disconnect. I mean, here in Scotland, I don't know what it's like down in England and across the UK. Here in Scotland, we have a couple of MSPs who they themselves are farmers, and obviously we time and time again at protests, we see them protesting shoulder to shoulder with farmers. Do you think perhaps wider afield in our political landscape there's a disconnect between, you know, what farmers need in terms of support and what the understanding that they're showing towards our farmers?
Yeah, I feel very strong that we have lost a connection between our farmers and food producers and our end consumers. So, you know, just 30 years ago, I feel that we had a much greater understanding of what farming did. Today, we've lost that connection. However, the one real benefit we have now is social media. So you can go log online and you can see so many farmers picking up their mobile phones, connecting microphones and talking about the day-to-day and actually learning what's going on farms. So if you really want to learn about farming, just log on, have a gander at what's going on social media and follow us, even if you want to see what's happening on our farm.
Fantastic. Well, Bryce, thank you so much again for having us here today. I'm going to be sticking around a little while longer, but certainly one to ponder maybe for Keir in the former home of the other Keir.
Fantastic stuff. Tony Maguire live from Mochlin with an A as it was not written in my autocue. But there we go. It's Tony Maguire, thanks so much for joining us. Last Scotland reporter there. Well, still to come, we're going to be talking about New Year's. Yes, it's a time for, well, cocktails for many. I'm going to be talking to party planner to the stars, Liz Taylor, sharing her tips on how to make the perfect New Year's cocktail. But before then, if you're in search for some winter sun, here are your top European holiday destinations.
Be nice to escape the grey.
Clear skies, here we come.
As clear as our travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello there, welcome to your latest winter sun forecast. Well, as we see at 2024, it's going to remain fairly unsettled for parts of Cyprus and Greece. This area of cloud and rain continues to linger here. But for much of Italy, Spain and Portugal, a fairly quiet couple of days with some late winter sunshine here. A few showers for Madeira, maybe just creeping into Canaries. But as we approach New Year's Day itself, it should be fairly fine and dry across the Canaries.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
The latest Channel 4 Dispatches documentary has revealed details about the royal family's finances, including reports that private royal estates have received millions of pounds of income from public bodies and charities.
Morning, and morning, Stephen. Absolutely, I'm not shocked either. And also, as a former butler, I was also a duchy rentee. I used to rent one of the properties, and we were always aware of the property portfolio. I don't think it's kind of a bit news thing. Obviously, part of the, if you like, the business side is these two duchies, Cornwall and Lancaster, and the late Queen obviously was the Duke as well of Lancaster, and now you've got the Prince was obviously, or the King, when he was Prince, had the duchy. And these properties, portfolios as well, I mean, obviously they make money. I mean, but they've been around for, I think they go back to George III, if not before.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo, but not with Michael Portillo, with me, Tom Harwood. Now, Cameron Walker, our royal reporter, has been looking at a royal year around the world.
The royal family was propelled onto the global stage this year, representing brand Britain and deploying their soft power despite their private health battles. The King and Queen travelled thousands of miles to Australia, the first time His Majesty had visited as the country's head of state and the first reigning king to step foot on its soil.
Welcome to Australia. Lovely to have you here.
Partly due to the King's cancer diagnosis, the trip lasted only 6 days, visiting Sydney and Canberra. Hailed by crowds, but heckled by individuals. Senator Lydia Thorpe was widely condemned for her outburst and was symbolically censored by Australian lawmakers. Meanwhile, the King made a point of acknowledging the traditions and lives of Indigenous communities and spent time listening to their experiences. Republican protesters were kept well back by police when Their Majesties visited the Sydney Opera House. An estimated crowd of well-wishers exceeded 10,000 people. Then Their Majesties travelled more than 4,000 miles into the middle of the South Pacific to visit Samoa, first for a short state visit, followed by the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, the first time King Charles had presided over the conference as its head.
Since this is the first occasion on which I find myself attending this gathering of our family of nations as head of the Commonwealth, It gives my wife and myself enormous pleasure and pride to be with you for this 27th Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting.
I have hope and I have that optimism that these guys and girls can change our future.
Meanwhile, the Prince of Wales flew to Cape Town for his 4th annual Earthshot Prize, designed to find solutions to repair the planet in this critical decade. The first time the prize was held on the African continent, Prince William was keen to spotlight African innovation and young people. Earthshot Prize Ambassador Robert Irwin spoke to GB News.
When you think of the Earthshot Prize, instantly you think of Prince William. His devotion and his dedication to conservation is unparalleled. It is absolutely amazing. And it's so encouraging to see someone, of course, with a brilliant platform that's using that platform 100% to create positive change for our environment.
When's your next match?
Royal sources have confirmed the King will resume a more normal-looking programme of international travel next year. The Prince of Wales hopes he and the Princess of Wales will carry out more international travel too. Both households, however, are keeping tight-lipped about the destinations. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Well, thanks for being with us here at Portillo this weekend. Up next, it is The Weekend.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. As we see at 2024, the weather is certainly turning increasingly unsettled. For some of us, it could potentially